Made in China is often a sign of something being cheaply made, be it through simple materials or questionable labor policies. So when you hear the phrase being used to describe a steam locomotive, one of the most temperamental and complex machines humans have ever created, you'd expect the worst. Yet not one, not two, but 6 Chinese steam locomotives call the United States of America home, and all are presently under the age of 40. How can this be? In this bonus to Retracing History episode 87, let's talk about America's 6-pack of Chinese steam and its impact on historical preservation. Why would American railroads be buying Chinese steam locomotives? Well, because it's cheaper, like everything else American consumers import. But there's more to it. In the 1980s, railroad tourism was growing in prominence as a means of maintaining both the rail infrastructure and local economies along railroad right-of-ways. The biggest draw for an excursion operation is to be helmed by a steam locomotive. But as time marches on, it becomes increasingly harder to find a steam locomotive capable of being restored. Depending on the condition of the engine, you're looking less at a restoration and more of a reconstruction. Wouldn't it be nice if you could buy a brand new steam locomotive instead, complete with spare parts? That's the thought process that compelled the Valley Railroad out of Essex, Connecticut to investigate purchasing a steam locomotive from China. With one of its steam locomotives sidelined due to a broken driving wheel tire and another on borrowed time due to an expected overhaul, a new motive power was urgently needed. The cost of purchasing and shipping a locomotive from China would be approximately $400,000. But why China? In the wake of its unification under a communist regime, China had opted not to take part in dieselization or electrification of its rail network. Simply put, they perceived it as a less efficient way because it would take the time to teach the skills needed to construct and operate diesel and electric locomotives, taking away time that they could just be making more steam locomotives. Why fix what wasn't broken? As such, China kept trucking along with steam as if nothing had changed in railroad technology all the way into the 1980s. So if you wanted a brand new steam locomotive, you weren't going to go to Alco or Baldwin, you were going to go to Tangshan or Datong. After examining multiple classes, the Valley settled on importing an SY-282 from the Tangshan Locomotive Works. Between 1960 through 1999, some 1,800 SYs would be produced. Although not universal, the SYs came with a distinct slope-back tender to allow for reverse operations, a feat common in the industrial areas they were assigned to. However, state law prevented the SY in its original capacity from operating on Connecticut rails on account of its boiler. I don't think it's going to surprise anyone when I say the SY boilers did not meet the standards of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, which was a big problem for the Valley Railroad. Thus, the SY the Valley actually ordered was a modified design, which strengthened the boiler, as well as altering the controls to meet American specifications. The final product, which rolled out of the Tangshan Works in early 1989, was SY-1647M, but she was not alone. The Knox and Kane Railroad of northwestern Pennsylvania was seeking a more powerful locomotive that can handle the high demand for their excursion rides to the famous Kinzhou Bridge. Their order placed to the Tangshan Works resulted in SY-1658M. Around the same time these modified SYs were being built, a similar acquisition occurred at the Datong Locomotive Works. The Boone and Scenic Valley Railroad of Iowa had purchased an JS-282 numbered 8419, fresh off the factory floor in late 1988. Unlike her companions, 8419 did not need to be heavily modified to comply with state standards. This meant that the original Chinese control configuration of the engineer being on the left and the fireman on the right was retained. The free locomotives were intended to be shipped stateside in the spring of 1989, but a certain event involving a tiny man with a rectangular shape pushed it back until the fall. The transport had all free locomotives shared, first stop in Long Beach, California to offload the 8419. Apparently, the SJ couldn't wait to touch the land of freedom as she jumped from her crane sling. The cab was damaged in the fall, but timely repairs allowed for 8419 to make its very first runs out of Boone, Iowa in December of 1989. The SYs journeyed through the Panama Canal before being offloaded in Camden, New Jersey. Valley Railroad 1647 made its public debut on April 21, 1990. The Knox and Kane 1658, later renumbered to simply 58, would begin operations that same year. A fourth railroad joined in on the fun, this time the New York, Susquehanna, and Western. We'll just be calling it the Susquehanna for the rest of the video. They were interested in acquiring their own modified SY to lead excursions on its rails across the state of New York. In December of 1990, SY 1698M rolled out of the Tianjin Locomotive Works. The Susquehanna Technological and Historical Society advised that the locomotive be renumbered to 141, as the last newly built locomotive for the Susquehanna was 140 back in 1908. Number 141's delivery date was also delayed due to current events, this time the Gulf War. It wouldn't be until the summer of 1991 that number 141 got itself a transport. But on June 7th, 1991, tragedy would strike. The transport was passing through the Bay of Bengal when it began to take on water. The 15-year-old transport was no match for the ocean's waters, which poured into the hull and sank the entire ship with its cargo, meaning that somewhere underneath the waves of the Bay of Bengal lays a most likely crushed steam locomotive that never got to run on its intended home rails. An insurance policy had been placed on number 141, but the Susquehanna looked for a more simplistic option in finding a replacement. Luckily for them, a lightly used one was being put up for sale. It was Valley 1647. Now, there is some controversy over what motivated the Valley to sell their brand new motive power just 2 years into operation, but it appears it was a combination of its historic power returning to service, coupled with the effects of the United States' early 90s recession, which compelled the Valley to sell the 1647 as it was no longer necessary to have. The sale would be finalized in early 1992, seeing the modified SY being renumbered to number 142. Under Susquehanna ownership, the locomotive would be leased by the Technological and Historical Society for a wide variety of excursions throughout the decade. And these were not simply short-line hops, as number 142 visited Steamtown for its opening as a national park in 1995, and double-headed with Chesapeake and Ohio 614. By the end of the decade, number 142 had quickly made history for the various outings that it participated in across the Mid-Atlantic region. There's nothing really else to comment about these free locomotives, as they ran hard and well in the 90s, enough to make more railroads consider buying Chinese-built steam locomotives. In 2006, a press release from the Railroad Development Company announced their acquisition of two QJ210-2s from China. But things had changed. Buying a locomotive off the factory floor was no longer possible. By the end of the 20th century, diesel and electric designs conceived in-house justified the China State Railway in phasing out steam production. The Tong ceased steam production in 1988, with Tianjin continuing to build SYs for secondary railroads until 1999. However, the mass production led to the mother of all surpluses that China was trying to get rid of as fast as possible. The largest number of the surplus came from the QJs, with 4,700 having been reportedly built. The two that RDC acquired, number 6988 and number 7081, had been built in 1985 and 1986 respectively, and had operated on the Jintong Railway in Inner Mongolia. The RDC wished to run revenue freight as well as excursions with the twins at their Iowa Interstate Railroad as a community outreach initiative. The QJ stormed out onto the Iowa Interstate in September of 2006. Seek out footage of these early runs, and it's quite a peculiar sight. You got these two locomotives with very obvious Soviet influence in its design roaring through the American farmlands. It's like the red dawn of steam locomotives. QJ twins were sold to the Central States Steam Preservation Association. 6988 was brought back into service, now sporting the moniker of the Iowan Bolt, in 2018. It ran sporadic excursions until the summer of 2022. 2008 would be a historic year for the Chinese-American Railroad connection. First worth mentioning is a third QJ had been started operations in the United States. This was QJ number 7040. Built in 1986 at Datong, which had been acquired by the R.J. Corman Railroad Group for use on its Kentucky lines. Renumbered to 2008, it made a handful of freight and excursion runs through 2013. Honestly, 2008 is a bit of a mystery for me, as not too much has been written about it. It has spent more time in America shelved than an actual operation. In 2020, R.J. Corman sold it to the Kentucky Steam Heritage Corporation, and is awaiting an evaluation of whether it can be returned to service. But if you watched episode 87 of Retracing History, you're aware that something big happened in 2008 relating to number 58. The locomotive, as well as the whole railroad it had worked for, had gone radio silent since the mid-2000s because its excursion highlight, the Kinzu Bridge, had been destroyed by a tornado. If they were to return to service, both 58 and stablemate 38 were going to have to require some serious overhaul after sitting in storage in Kane, Pennsylvania for so long. But any hopes of an ox and cane coming back to life died on March 16, 2008, when arsonists set fire to the Kane, Pennsylvania railroad facilities. Both locomotives suffered severe damage, and the railroad decided to auction off all of its rolling stock. The winning bid for the charred husk of number 58 was placed by representatives of the Valley Railroad. If there was anyone who was going to return a modified SY back to operating condition, it would be the very railroad that initiated this whole Chinese-American steam connection. During a 3-year restoration, number 58 was not merely brought back to operating condition, but cosmetically altered to look like a J1 class that the New Haven Railroad had once operated. In addition to making the locomotive appear more at home in Connecticut, this also brings the story of the SY full circle. See, the SY class had evolved from the JF6, which in turn was merely a modification of the JF1 that had been imported from the United States to Manchuria in the wake of the First World War. Both the JF1 and the J1s had been classes built by the American Locomotive Works. On November 18, 2011, number 58 began its new life of excursion operations on the Valley, now going by New Haven number 3025. Since its return to operation, 3025 has been one of the leading forms of motive power on the Valley Railroad. What are the rest of the Chinese locomotives in America up to as of late 2024? Well, all 3 QJs need some kind of overhaul or full-blown restoration to bring them back to service. But those require considerable time and money to complete. Susquehanna 142 has been owned by the New York Susquehanna and Western Technological and Historical Society since 2003, who have been running excursions out of Phillipsburg, New Jersey in a partnership with the Belvedere and Delaware River Railway. Currently, 142 is in the final stages of its mandatory 1472-day FRA mandated inspection, and will hopefully return to the rails soon. Yes, I know I said mandatory twice and made that redundant, but I kind of think, again, that kind of sets in how tedious the 1472 can be. As for JS number 8419, it returned to service after its own inspection wrapped up in 2023. Of all the locomotives we've discussed, it truly has had the luckiest life, as since arriving stateside in 1989, it has always been motive power for the Boone and Scenic Valley Railroad. That's the story of America's six-pack of Chinese steam. Just a fascinating little wrinkle to the idea of historical preservation when it relates to railroads. Which of these locomotives is your favorite? 142, 3025, 8419, or the QJs? Let me know in the comments section. I, of course, have a bias toward 3025 due to its Pennsylvania ties. 2008 is a strange beast with how little history there is to find about it. It's a historical black hole, with the most interesting thing I can find attached to it is this railroad form back in the day decrying it as the Walmart Express. 142 to me is the most historic of all the locomotives we discussed, because it's what generated this whole phenomenon. And although it's changed ownership quite a few times, it retains its SY shape. Hey, thank you guys for watching. This has been a little bit different from my normal videos. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button down below. If you want to follow us on our future adventures, consider subscribing here to Readout Productions. If you want to go the extra mile supporting us, you can join our membership program, The Garrison, for our Ko-fi page. Link is in the description below. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.